Okay, so our first lecture will focus on insect pest monitoring for timing of control measures and also insect pest crop yield loss models. We want to see how we can assess the impact of the presence of insect pests to crop yield losses. So pest monitoring, we can determine the distribution of the pests in the cropping areas. Like I said, we did such an exercise around the Murewa area, actually for the 2 seasons. Monitoring is important for forecasting pest outbreaks. If we have this data with us about the pests, we can predict when an outbreak is likely to occur, and therefore we are likely to take some measures. I understand there's been some fall armyworm outbreaks in certain parts of Zimbabwe, and of course some control measures had to be taken, but what I don't know is whether farmers were prepared for these outbreaks, or whether when they occurred people knew about them. So what we are saying is that if we have information about these pests, we are likely to predict when an outbreak is likely to occur, and we are more prepared to deal with the problems. Otherwise, we end up being overwhelmed by these insect pests. We can use traps, so that probably we do some counts. Reliable estimates of pest incidents, probably we need to take some samples that are representative of insect pest abundance. Because if there is bias, we may have interest in certain sampling areas. We end up probably underestimating the problem or overestimating it. So proper sampling procedures are required. Well, these are some of the methods which are used in monitoring insect pests. We have got the number 1 malaise, trapping, light trapping, penny trapping, pitfall trapping, beating sheet, acoustic monitoring, active visual surveys. So we just use what is appropriate for our own conditions. So it is important to have a scientific approach when we are getting this data. So the sampling techniques which are used, we could use a random sampling. We can use stratified sampling, and the third we could use systematic sampling. Now for random sampling, every sample has an equal chance of being selected. Probably we look at a certain area, we label the areas probably using a map, then we number the areas, then we randomly select the areas using the numbers, so that we go and sample a certain proportion of a representative area. We can use use of coordinates selected from random number tables. Now, in stratified sampling, we deliberately divide the sample into different strata. Maybe we have got background information about the area. It could be soil types. We may group certain soil types together. Or it could be different agroecological zones which are within the same area. You may have natural region 2, 3, and 4 in one province. So you may want to capture the agroecological differences. But you now have random samples being taken from different strata. Let's say you had divided your area in natural region 2, 3 and 4, probably like what we have in Mrewa and in Mutoko. Now within each natural region or within each strata, you take random samples. So strata is the subdivisions of samples. Now, in systematic samples, which could be commonly used, you are taking your samples at fixed positions. You take samples at specified distance interval, or you use the interval. You can also use sampling using a W pattern or a zigzag pattern in a given crop field, so that you capture a representative sample. So these are sampling techniques so that you get reliable information. You can have a square field, a long and narrow field. You just plan your sampling in such a way that you get a representative sample. Sample size is also important, because if you have a smaller sample, you tend to underestimate what is there. So population estimate, you need a good sample size if you are going to estimate that population. You may have absolute estimate, where you try to include as many candidates as possible during sampling. You want to include as many sampling points as possible. You could have counts per unit area, counts of the insect pests, or of volume, or of plant parts, or just a plant. For example, number of eggs per leaf. It could be number of larvae per plant, which you may be interested in. Now, we can have relative estimates where you use traps. Now a trap can actually prevent insects from escaping, and you can go and get your insects and count them. Or we can use pheromones to attract insects to a certain point, then we can count them. So you can have active and capture areas. Trap data could be so variable that it becomes difficult to interpret data, because you could have a mass of these insects. Then by the end of the day, you may have difficulties in getting useful information. We may also look at what is known as fecundity, the number of eggs produced during the lifetime of the female insect pest. Probably you may have to do some other detailed studies to get this information. Development and growth. You may also look at migration, movement of insects for long distances. Maybe it could be the fall armyworm. So here we've got somebody who is trying to sample for insects using that for trapping. So whatever is caught in that trap is counted, and it can give us estimates of what is in a given area. Sometimes we may use yellow cards or boards which are attached to the plants, and these services may have a sticking substance which actually traps the insects. So here we've got various types of trapping equipment. Some equipment may allow insects to get inside, but they are not going to get out of that trap. And they could be placed at random or systematically placed in fields. Again, a lot of traps being used, and in some pictures you see a number of insects which have been caught. This one is another type of trap. It looks like a funnel at the top. If something gets inside that bottle, it's not going to get out. So you have your insects at the bottom there, which are going to be counted, so that we can estimate the population of the insects in a given area. So let's have the monitoring strategies and objectives. Sometimes we may conduct surveys in order to obtain information about insect pests which are problematic in a given area. Or we could have field-based monitoring strategies where we just target certain fields, or we could have a fixed position monitoring strategies. Now let us look at a survey. This is probably what we were doing in Murewa and probably Mutoko areas when we were sampling for both for all of the pests, weeds, insect pests, diseases in the farmers' fields. Now in a survey you may want to determine the status of a particular pest in an area. You also want to record the environmental factors. Now when you have your population data, and you have got environmental factors, maybe you can do further analysis and try to predict the incidence of pests or pest forecasting. Now let us look at the field-based monitoring strategy. I said in a survey it gives you a broader picture, and there are possibilities which you can use to predict the incidence of a pest in a given location. But as for field-based monitoring strategy, this is aimed probably at the farmer. So it can provide the farmer with a decision-making tool. It could be like scouting for pests in a cotton field. And the farmers probably have a control strategy of saying that if the insect numbers reach this level, you start spraying, things like that. So some of these issues are actually done so that the farmer can actually decide when to control or when to spray. So field-based sampling techniques, it could be traps, use of traps, or simply counting eggs and larvae on the leaf, like what they do in cotton. I think for the pink bollworm, they have to count the larvae, they may have to count the eggs. If they exceed a certain number per leaf, then they know that it is now time to spray. Now this is very important because the farmer is not just going to spray anyhow, because this can be costly. And also, if we just spray anyhow, we may also kill beneficial insects, which can help us with also biological control. So we don't want it to damage the ecosystem using these chemicals, but we want it to manage the chemicals properly so that they help us to control the pests. So, as I have just said, data on insect pests could be used to decide on insecticide applications. And we have got a typical example of the cotton spraying strategies, pest spraying strategies. Now, fixed position monitoring. Actually, this technique may be restricted to research stations where they use traps which are maintained every cropping season. Insects are assembled over a number of seasons, so that at that particular research station there's information about the pest occurring patterns, and people may have a general idea about when to spray, and this data may also be applied outside that station, so that because it will be detailed information. If the station has got similar conditions to the farming areas, probably it could be applied. Now let us look at the actual monitoring techniques for insect pests. We have what are known as light and suction traps, which are commonly used in research stations. We can have insect-specific traps and insect counts on crops, stages, and forms are also noted. We may use peg boards like that yellow board which I showed you earlier on. The boards could be used by farmers. I think they could be cheap. Sometimes, instead of monitoring these insects, pests, we could have fixed schedule sprays, but the disadvantage is that some of the sprays could be unnecessary. Now this is, we have a diagram here where we can use data collected from pest counts. If you follow that arrow, the green arrow there, it indicates where the control has been can be administered, because the pest population will tend to exceed that green line, which is the threshold. So at that stage we administer a spray, and the population will go down so that we can increase the benefit. But if we wait later, when the population of insects is too high, probably we are going to use a lot of insecticides, and probably a lot of damage will have occurred. So crop yield loss due to insect pests, what are the factors which are important? It could be the number of pests present in a crop. Also the insect development stage in a crop, and the period of the pest attack, the duration of the pest attack can contribute to crop yield loss. Important information, estimates of insect numbers in a crop could be important, or even the population structure of the insect pests. What are the, do we have larvae, pupa, and so on, adults? Probably we could determine the stages which are being which are causing the damage. Scale of damage, we can also assess to what extent are the insects, pests damaging the crop. Type of pest damage: chewing, sucking, and boring. Now, chewing is particularly harmful to the crop, or it has got a relationship to yield loss because it can reduce the photosynthetic area, which contribute to either grain yield or bore size. Chewing on flowering and fruit structures, these can directly reduce crop yield. Leaf beetle, Ceratoma trifecata, will feed on average 0.94 soybean pods per day. So if we have that kind of data, having many beetles, we can predict the loss. Now, effects of insect pests on crops. Insects that bore into the plant tissue, like leaf miners, plant stem borers, and insects that bore into the fruits and the grain. This may be difficult to control. And these can actually destroy the fruits and the grain, leading to serious losses. Then we have got sucking insects, which may interfere with now partitioning of carbohydrates. You know, the movement of carbohydrates from the leaves to the seeds which are being formed will be interrupted, and this can lead to crop yield losses. So sometimes we may need to do crop yield loss surveys. We may need to do plant growth analysis and modeling so that we understand better how the insect pests are affecting crops. Now, from field surveys which involve the use of questionnaires and field sampling together, could be used to assess crop yield loss due to insect pests. Probably you may ask the farmers whether they had taken control measures. You may compare where they took control measures to where they didn't, and probably assess the impact of these pests. You can carry out crop damage scores and insect pest counts in sampling areas. The question is, can we relate the insect pest counts to the crop damage scores? You can also take using quadrats after having gathered your data on the insect pests. Try to measure crop yields as well. Then in your analysis, you are going to relate crop yields or crop yield losses, to crop damage scores or insect pest counts. You may do plant growth analysis and modeling of insect pest-free crops, right, versus insect pest-infested crops. You compare the two, where you have infestation versus where you have plants which are free from insect damage. Some of the parameters of interest could be leaf area, because it can be reduced because the insect pests are eating the leaves. Leaf area ratio, can be important, and it can be obtained using that equation, where you have probably leaf area over the weight of the leaves. Then you can also have relative growth rates, crop growth models can also assist to assess insect pest damage or impact of insect pests on crops. Or we can actually deliberately conduct field experiments. So assessing the impact of artificial infestation, we can infest some crops deliberately. Infested is compared to uninfested plants. Insect pest damage simulations could be done, removing, we can actually remove parts of leaves of the crop to simulate insect pest damage. Paired treatment experiments could be done. Controls are compared to insect sprayed plots, just to see the impact of the insects on the crops. Or a number of treatments could be used, e.g. use of insecticides to create various different levels. Probably these are the sort of graphs which you may get when you relate is it crop damage or insect populations versus yield. As you increase damage or number of insect pests, you tend to decrease yield. The first graph is a straight line, but things are not that simple. Sometimes at first you don't get a quick drop in yield until you reach a certain threshold where control should be done. Then we have a big drop in the yield, and you also reach a point where even if the insects are present, they can no longer do a lot of damage. Probably they've finished all the leaves. This is seed yield, probably related to incidence of pests. Let me see, yeah. This is pollen beetle damage percentage related to seed yield. So you have a decrease in the seed yield. So this is a yield loss or a relative yield loss, where you have injury level. So if you increase the damage, or it could be leaf damage due to insects which are eating leaves, the losses will also increase in a sort of a curve. So that is the percent relative yield loss. Because if you plot relative yield loss, it tends to increase as you increase the injury level. But of course, if you plot against the actual yield and injury level, at first nothing seems to be happening, then you get a decrease. So there's a region where you can actually do the measurable loss, and a region where we can define the economic loss and the yield potential. Also what we call the threshold. So we can use these graphs to determine when we want to control the insects to prevent further damage. So this is it for the insect pests.